Hi, welcome to my channel. For today's video, I'm going to be doing a mid-year reading update. So for this video, I'm going to be using the questions from the mid-year Freakout tag. I've seen this all over booktube. I've seen a lot of people do it. I'm really excited to film this. I have read 50 books this year so far, and the timing for this is just perfect because 50 is halfway to my goal. I wanted to read 100 books this year, and we are obviously halfway through the year now. So yeah, let's just get into the questions. So for most of these questions, I do have more than one answer for them. It was hard to just pick one book because I've read some really great books this year. So I went ahead and picked like a couple pretty much for every question. So yeah. So the first question is best book you've read so far in 2022, which was difficult because I've read a lot of really good books. I've also read a lot of really mediocre books this year, which is kind of a surprise because last year I read so many amazing books. I had so many 5-star books, and this year a lot of my books have been really kind of like average and mediocre. But yeah, I haven't had too many 5-star books, but I do have a few really amazing books that I've read this year that I'm obviously going to mention. So these books I'm going to mention aren't necessarily in order. These are my top 3. So the first book I'm going to mention is Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover. I read this book back in January, like right when it first came out, and it was amazing. This is one of the best books that I have ever read. I just loved it so much. I did a book review video for this book, but yeah, it was so good. I love Colleen Hoover, so I knew I was going to really love this book, and it totally met all of my expectations. And then the next book I'm going to mention, this one was actually my 50th book of this year, but I finally read Addicted After All from the Addicted series by Kristen Becca Ritchie. I've talked about these books so many times before. I've been putting off reading this series. I've just been reading it super slowly, but I finally read this book. This is the end of the Addicted series. It made me really sad to read it, but this book was amazing. I literally loved it so much. I love these characters a lot. All 6 of these characters from this series are just like my favorite book characters I've ever read. This series is seriously so amazing. It's literally one of my favorite series. I'm not even done with it, but I just know I love it that much. But in this book, specifically Lily and Lo, I just love them. This book was the perfect conclusion to their story. I know it's not completely done yet because there's still the epilogue book and they're still going to appear in the other books, but this is kind of like their happy ending for the most part, I guess. And I loved it. I loved seeing the development for these characters and seeing how far they've come. I have like this like really deep attachment to these characters and this series, but this book was amazing. I was really sad to finally read it, but I'm also so glad that I finally did read it. And then the last book is another one that I mentioned before, but it's Say You Swear by Megan Brandy. This book was so good. I just can't get over it. I didn't expect it to be as amazing as it was, but I just love it so much. It's literally one of my favorite books ever. I cannot recommend it enough. This one is another one that I've done a book review video for it, but yeah, but this book is just amazing. I am obsessed with it, and I've talked about it before. It's just such a great book. 5 stars. All 3 of these obviously were 5 stars. They were just amazing books, and they're definitely my top reads of this year so far. So the next question is the best sequel you've read so far. So again, I have a couple answers. So the first book I'm going to mention is Terms and Conditions by Lauren Asher. This is the sequel to The Fine Print, and I guess technically it's not like a direct sequel because it is also a standalone, but I'm going to count it anyway. This book was just so good. It was amazing, and I really loved it. I didn't expect to love it as much as I did. It's also another one of my favorite reads this year, but it's a really great book. It's a marriage of convenience trope, and I just really loved everything about it. I had really loved the first book, so I was so excited to read this one, and it exceeded my expectations. It was even better than the first one. So yeah, this one is definitely one of the best sequels I've read this year. And then of course I have to mention the Addicted series because these are like actual sequels, since they do need to be read in order and they can't be read like on their own. So I read Thrive and Addicted After All both this year. All the books that come before this one, I read them all last year. So these are the few sequels that I have read this year. Honestly, I haven't read very many sequels this year anyway, but I had to mention these because obviously I love these books so much, and they were sequels that I read this year, and both of these were really great. I really enjoyed reading both of them. The next question is a new release that you haven't read yet but want to. There's a few that I really want to read, but the first ones that came to mind for this question were Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score, which I have on my shelf. I bought this book back in March. I don't know when it came out, but I do know it came out this year, I'm pretty sure, and I've been saying I was going to read it, and I just haven't read it yet, but I really want to. And then the next book that I wanted to mention that was like one of my most anticipated reads for this year is Twisted Lies by Anna Huang. This book, I actually started reading it already. I mentioned this one in my book haul video that I did, but yeah, I'm actually on chapter 29 as of right now, so I'm a little over halfway through, but I just wanted to mention this book because this one was one that I just was so excited to read. I love this series so much, so yeah, this one was one that was definitely an anticipated read for me, and I'm excited to finish it soon. This one will be my 51st book of the year. The next question question is most anticipated release for the second half of the year, and I feel like there's quite a few books coming out soon that I really want to read, but the one that I'm the most excited for is It Starts With Us by Colleen Hoover. I briefly mentioned this book before when I did my review of Reminders of Him because she had just announced this book, and I literally cannot wait to read this book. I just know it's going to be amazing. I've talked about It Ends With Us before. It's one of my favorite books of all time. It's such an amazing story, so I know I'm going to love this one too. I'm so excited to see how this story goes. So yeah, this one is definitely like probably my #1 top anticipated read of the entire year. And then another one that I'm really excited for, which comes out I think in August, but it's The American Roommate Experiment by Elena Armas. So I think I've briefly also mentioned this book before, but this is the second book following The Spanish Love Deception. So it follows the best friend and the cousin of the main character in The Spanish Love Deception, and I love The Spanish Love Deception. It's literally my favorite rom-com ever. I talk about it way too much. I always bring it up, I feel like. But yeah, I loved that book so much. It's amazing. I thought it was so cute. I know a lot of people don't like it. It has some mixed reviews, but it's literally one of my favorite books ever. They're making it into a movie, so hopefully everything works out with that and we get that movie because I am so excited for that. Like, I literally can't wait. Like, that's my favorite rom-com book and they're turning it into a movie. But obviously this book is coming out in August. I can't wait to read it. I'm sure I'm gonna love it because of how much I loved The Spanish Love Deception, and I loved Aaron. He was like one of my top favorite book boyfriends for the longest time, and so I feel like because of the way Elena wrote Aaron, she's gonna write this new character in a way that's also gonna make me fall in love with him, but I can't wait to read it. So the next question is the biggest disappointment. So I have two that I want to mention for this one because they were just like two of probably the worst books I've read. I did not enjoy them at all. But the first one is To Love Jason Thorne. I read this in February, I'm pretty sure. I think I rated it like 2 stars just because I finished it. I feel like because I was like able to get through it and I finished it, I was like, I guess it's at least 2 stars. But yeah, I just didn't like this book at all. I feel like so many people love it, so I was so excited to read it. I thought I was gonna love it too because it has some of my favorite tropes in it, but it was incredibly disappointing. I didn't really like it at all. It took me like a week, I think, to read it, or maybe it took me less than that. I don't really remember. I just know like I finished it faster than I thought I would considering how much I didn't like it, but I also like continued reading it. I don't know, but I didn't think it was a good book. I didn't really like it. I didn't like the characters. I didn't like the way they were written. It was just a really disappointing book considering how excited I was to read it. And then the next book I want to mention is Pucked by Helena Hunting. I didn't like this book at all. I just like didn't get why it was so popular. There was just so many cringy things about it. I didn't like the characters. The humor to me was not funny at all. Like, I just thought it was so cringy and I just did not enjoy reading this book at all. Both of these were just not very good books to me, but again, that's just me. I didn't enjoy them. If you did, like, that's great. That's totally fine. Like, I'm glad that people do enjoy these books, but they just were not for me. So the next question is biggest surprise, and I don't know if this is like meant in like a good way, like a book that you surprisingly loved, but I decided to interpret it a little different, so I just went with like the book that was the most surprising to me that I read it, and that was Ice Planet Barbarians by Ruby Dixon. I mentioned this book in my May wrap-up because that's when I read it, and I kind of talked about why I read it, and I kind of gave the background of it, and I said in that video that I would never talk about this book again. That would be the first and last time I talked about it, but it was the first book that kind of came to mind when I saw this question because I had no interest in reading this book at all. I was literally never going to read it, and I kind of told this story in my May wrap-up video, but basically it was a joke between me and my cousins where we kept saying that we were going to read this book, and then my cousin bought it for me, so I read it. So it's just a surprise because I wasn't ever going to read it. Like, I had no interest in reading it. I kind of gave my thoughts on it in that video, so I won't go like in depth or anything. I didn't like it, I'll say that. Like, it was just surprising that I read it, but also it wasn't the worst book I've read because the last two I mentioned were not good, and then like this one, I wouldn't say it was a good book, but like I think what happened was I went into this with the right like mindset and the right expectations, so I wasn't like mad about it after I finished reading it, you know? Like, I knew what the story was about, I knew kind of what was gonna happen, so I knew like what mindset to have going into this book, and I knew like not to take it seriously, and so because of that I wasn't like completely disappointed by it because I knew everything about it basically. So yeah, I feel like going into books with like a certain mindset really helps with how you're gonna feel about it afterwards. So knowing what I knew about this book, that helped, and like I didn't hate it, but I didn't like it either. I was kind of like, why am I reading this at the same time? But I read it, and I got through it, so it wasn't good, but again, I think it was just because I went in with that mindset of like not expecting too much out of this book. So the next question is favorite new author, whether it's a debut author or a new author to you. So I decided to go with Lauren Asher because I read one of her books for the first time this year. I read The Fine Print, and then obviously I read Terms and Conditions after, and I really loved both of them. I thought they were both really great books. I really enjoyed reading them, and I really like her writing too. I think she has a total of 6 books that are published, but I just read those 2. I definitely want to read the rest of her books. I have all of them. Obviously the Dirty Air series, again, they're right here on my shelf behind me. The next question is newest fictional crush, and of course I have to go with Noah from Say You Swear. I literally just love him so much. I have not read a more perfect book boyfriend than Noah. Him alone is just enough of a reason to read this book because he's just perfect. I love him. I can't get over how much I love him. He's literally just my top book boyfriend ever of all the books that I've ever read. I instantly just loved Noah from the first moment that he's introduced. I was obsessed with him. I could go on and on about how much I love him, but I feel like if you haven't read this book, you should just read it because he's just perfect. I keep saying that, but he really is. He's just like the perfect book boyfriend. He's so sweet, he's so patient, and just everything about him, he's like, there's no flaws with him at all, and I just love him. So yeah, definitely read this book if you haven't yet. And then another one I just want to mention because I've completely fallen in love with this character also this year, but it's Lauren Hale from the Addicted and Callaway Sisters series. So obviously I started reading these books last year, and I started loving Lily and Lo like as a couple in the 3rd book of theirs, but I feel like it was this year though when I read the last 2 books in their series where I truly like loved these characters and saw Lo as like one of my top favorite book boyfriends ever. So yeah, so I'm gonna mention him because even though I started this series last year and I like read about this character last year, it was probably this year that I like really started to love him as like one of my favorite book boyfriends. And so the next question is newest favorite character of like female characters. So again, I have a few that I want to mention because I've read some really great characters this year. So the first one that came to mind is Iris from Terms and Conditions. I just really love her. I feel like she's an amazing character. She was a very strong, like well-written character. She was just great. Like I just really love her so much, and like the way that she is with Declan. Like he's very kind of like cold and like distant from everyone. I just love the way that she was a very strong character and like didn't let Declan ever walk all over her considering the way that he was with other people. And on top of that, this one is like a billionaire romance. So he offers her money and she takes it, which I love that. I love that she like didn't try to be all like, no, it's okay, it's your money, like didn't want to take it because he has so much money, like more than he knows what to do with, you know? And he offers her things and like pays for things for her and she doesn't complain. And I kind of loved that about her, that she was like that. So yeah, she's one of my favorite female characters that I've ever read. Also, because I mentioned her and she's like a Lauren Asher character, I do want to mention Zara because I liked her too. She was a really great character too, but I just feel like Iris just kind of stood out to me more. And then another character I really loved was Nora from Book Lovers. She is also just another really great, like strong, independent character. I really loved the way that she was written. I loved this book, and Nora was just a really great character to read, and just like seeing all that she goes through and just the type of person she is, she was just a really good character, I think. And then I kind of want to mention the Callaway Sisters, even though I did read these books last year, but I also read them this year, so I feel like it counts, even though they're not new to me because I've read them before, but the books that they appeared in, again, were new to me, so I feel like it's okay. But Rose, Daisy, and Lily are just 3 of my favorite female main characters ever. They're just amazing characters. I love all 3 of them for different reasons. Like, I love that all 3 of them are so different from each other, and it's just fun to read because I feel like reading these books, like you can kind of relate to each of them in different ways, at least I do, and so I just really love the 3 of them. So the next question is books that made you cry, and I cry really easily in books, but these are just kind of like the ones that were the most sad to me this year that I like sobbed to. So, well, the first ones I want to mention, I didn't cry that much. I just got like a little emotional. I cried a little bit, but I wasn't sobbing. But it was the Addicted books, Thrive and Addicted After All. I have to mention them again because I cried while reading these. Thrive, I did cry like kind of tears of sadness, and then Addicted After All, I cried tears of happiness, but a little bit sad. But it was just like normal crying. It wasn't like full on sobbing or anything, but I just wanted to mention these because they did make me cry. And then of course next is Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover. Obviously I cried while reading this book. It was incredibly heartbreaking, but such a beautiful story, and yeah, I cried so much throughout this book. And then next is the Wildflower duet by Macaulaya Smeltzer. This duet Duet starts off like really cute and kind of lighthearted, and then the first book just ends really tragically, and then the second one is pretty happy for the most part, but like some really kind of sad things go on in it too. I know there were some mixed opinions on it, but I thought it was really good and it completely broke my heart. There was a lot that went on in it, multiple things that happened that were like really sad to read, but yeah, they were really good books, just definitely really sad to read. And then the next book, I keep bringing it up, but I'm gonna bring it up again because this is one of the most heartbreaking books I've ever read in my life, and that was Say You Swear by Megan Brandy. The way I cried to this book, like I don't think I've ever cried like that for a book ever. I was full on sobbing. I talked about it in my book review for this, but I literally had to stop reading. I didn't think I could continue because of how heartbreaking it was. Like not even just like in that moment where I couldn't continue, like I was gonna quit reading the book. I was gonna DNF it because I just couldn't do it. I was so heartbroken. Like I didn't want to feel that sadness. Like I knew something heartbreaking might happen, but I really like wasn't prepared for this book at all. And yeah, it had me sobbing. It was bad. It was like one of the saddest books I've ever read in my life, but it was all okay in the end, and I really love this book a lot, but it was one of those books that really got me. The next question is books that made you happy, and of course I'm gonna bring up Addicted After All again because as sad as this book made me, it also made me really happy. It was a really sweet book. The ending was just perfect. I just loved it so much. I cried tears of happiness in the end, and it was just a really like beautiful ending for these characters because I just love them so much. They're literally soulmates, and their story is just, it's a really heartbreaking story, and they just go through so much together, but it's just so worth it in the end, like seeing, you know, how their story ends for the two of them and the way that they're able to kind of overcome a lot of things and learn to like live with their addictions. If you don't know, this story follows two main characters who both have different addictions. One is an alcoholic and one is a sex addict, and yeah, you just see like the conclusion to their story and how far they've come, and I just really loved it a lot. So yes, it made me sad, but it also made me really happy for these characters because I have a attachment to them, like I said, and I feel like they're real people even though they're not. And then the next book that I read earlier this year that also made me really happy was From Luke Off With Love by Mariana Zapata. This was actually my first book that I read this year, and I feel like it was a perfect way to start off this year because it was amazing. I literally love this book with all of my heart. It's so good. It made me so happy. It was so sweet. It's kind of like enemies to friends to lovers, and yeah, it was just such a cute book. I just loved it. I loved everything about it. I think I also did a book review for this book too, like back in January or something, or February, I don't know, it was a long time ago. Honestly, I feel like it's been so long since I read this book. Like I can't believe that that was only this year that I read this book, but yeah, it was a really good book. It definitely made me really happy. I loved it, and the banter between these characters was so good. I knew like right away with their banter that I was just gonna love them like from their first interaction together, so I really enjoyed reading this one. And then the next couple books I want to mention are Book Lovers by Emily Henry and Terms and Conditions by Lauren Asher. I specifically want to mention these two because they both had like really great banter between the main characters. Like it was just so good where I was reading like the scenes where they would interact with each other and I would just be like smiling the entire time. It was just so cute. So if you're looking for like books that have like that really cute banter between, you know, the female main character and the male main character, then both of these are just great. Like they were top tier banter. I literally loved it so much, and it just made me so happy to read these two. The next question is the most beautiful book you've bought or received this year. And so for me, I feel like the prettiest covers that I've purchased this year are the new covers for the Callaway Sisters series. Did I already own these books? Yes, but the new covers were gorgeous to me, so I had to buy them anyway, and I love that they match the covers of the Addicted series. So obviously I bought all four, so here's the Kiss the Sky cover, and then the Hot House Flower cover, and then Fuel the Fire, and then Long Way Down. So I just really loved all of these covers. I saw them and I was just instantly obsessed and knew I was going to buy them even though I did not need them. But they look really pretty on my shelf and they look nice next to the Addicted series. So obviously I just went ahead and bought them anyway. But yeah, I know that there's kind of some mixed opinions on these new covers, but personally I think they're really pretty. I really love that they have like the flowers and stuff on them. Also, I really love like object covers. Like I love book covers that have like things on it rather than like people or like the illustrated like cartoon covers, you know? Like I think the cartoon covers are cute, but my favorite type of covers are like the ones like these that just have like some sort of like object on it that represents the book. So the next question is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? And there's literally so many. Like There's so many that I have not read yet, books that I've been saying I'm gonna read and I just haven't read them yet. I mentioned a couple earlier. I also mentioned that I did a book haul, and pretty much all the books in that book haul are books I want to read this year. My biggest priority though is the Addicted and Callaway Sisters series. I definitely want to finish that entire series by the end of the year. So I have 2 books left, Fuel the Fire and Long Way Down, and I'm ready to read them. I know I've been putting off this series and I keep like talking about how I'm not prepared or whatever, but I'm actually prepared to read those 2. I'm not prepared for Some Kind of Perfect, but I'll read it eventually. I do want to read it by the end of the year, and then I want to read the Bad Reputation Duet, which is a spin-off of these books, by the end of the year. And then I also want to read the Dirty Air series by Lauren Asher, which I mentioned earlier. Those 2 series are kind of like my main priority series that I want to read for this year. I have a lot of like random standalone rom-coms on my shelf that I want to read. A goal for me, which I don't think this is going to happen, but I would like to get through a big majority of my TBR shelf. But yeah, like I said, my main priority is the Callaway Sisters series and the Dirty Air series. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the video. Those were kind of the books that were the most memorable for the year so far, whether it was in a good way or a bad way. Obviously, I read 50 so far, so we're halfway through the year, so hopefully I can get through the other 50 that are part of my goal by the end of the year. But definitely let me know any of your thoughts, and if you liked this and you're new to my channel, I would love it if you would stick around and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.